remember, this is a movement that is sort of the religion of the book squared, because not only is it the religion of the book in the Old and New Testament, but the Book of Mormon as well. So there has to be a real concern about texts. Text. And so text would appear, even to the ordinary citizen of Kirtland, I would think, as much more critical than the mummies.
His selling price was $2,400, which was an extreme sum in those days. Smith didn't have it, but since these were such valuable documents, Smith used two other people to invest sums of money, and they did, and Chandler sold these antiquities to Joseph Smith, and that's how he came into possession of them.
Joseph Smith said that to properly translate these scrolls would take some time, but that a few of the Egyptian characters were recognizable to him immediately, and he translated these for Chandler. Chandler thanked him profusely and supplied an affidavit endorsing Smith's scholarship.
This is to make known to all who may be desirous concerning the knowledge of Mr. Joseph Smith in deciphering the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic characters in my possession, which I have in many eminent cities showed to the most learned. And from the information that I could ever learn or meet with, I find that of Mr. Joseph Smith to correspond in the most minute matters.
Translation of the papyri commenced almost at once, with Joseph focusing his attention on one of the papyrus scrolls, which he identified as an ancient record of Abraham.
I have commenced the translation of some of the characters, or hieroglyphics, and much to our joy have found that one of the rolls contained the writings of Abraham, another with the writings of Joseph of Egypt, a more full account of which will appear in its place, as I proceed to examine or unfold them. Truly we can say, the Lord is beginning to reveal the abundance of peace and truth. July 5, 1835.
It was a remarkable claim. Could these papyri actually be the writings of Abraham, the patriarchal father of the Jewish, Christian, and Islamic religions? Did Joseph Smith really have the ability or inspiration to translate ancient Egyptian? And could these scrolls be what Joseph Smith claimed they were? In the weeks immediately after purchasing the scrolls, Joseph threw himself enthusiastically into the task of translation. He records in his diary that he began by developing an alphabet and grammar of the Egyptian language. The townspeople were duly impressed with the work, and scores of visitors would call on the prophet to see for themselves these wondrous things.
I was continually engaged in translating an alphabet of the Book of Abraham and arranging a grammar of the Egyptian language as practiced by the ancients. July 1835. In the afternoon, I waited on most of the 12 apostles in my house and exhibited to them the ancient records and gave explanations. This day passed off with the blessing of the Lord. October 3, 1835.
In 1835 in America, there was no one who could read ancient Egyptian. All knowledge of the language had been lost for centuries. Only recently had the French scholar Jean-Francois Champollion made a breakthrough in deciphering the ancient Egyptian language. The Rosetta Stone, a trilingual inscription in Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphic, and Demotic, was the key which allowed Champollion to unlock ancient Egyptian. But his work was far away from the pioneers of rural Ohio.
In the 1840s in the United States, the ancient Egyptian language was virtually unknown. It had only been deciphered beginning in 1822, and that knowledge simply had not crossed the Atlantic, so that almost any interpretation given to an Egyptian document in 1842 or 45 or 50 or even 1860 would have been believable to a general audience who would have no way of comparing it with the actual truth.
But in his diary, Joseph Smith confidently records doing what no scholar in America in his day could do: translating ancient Egyptian scrolls.
This afternoon, I labored on the Egyptian alphabet, in company with brothers Oliver Cowdery and W. Phelps. And during the research, the principles of astronomy, as understood by Father Abraham and the ancients, unfolded to our understanding, the particulars of which will appear hereafter. October 1, 1835. This afternoon, I recommenced translating from the ancient records. October 7, 1835. I returned home and spent the day in translating the Egyptian records. A warm and pleasant day. November 19, 1835. Spent the forenoon instructing those that called to inquire concerning the things of God in the last days. And in the afternoon, we translated some of the Egyptian records. November 24, 1835. Spent the day translating. November 25, 1835. At home, we spent the day in transcribing Egyptian characters from the papyrus. I'm severely afflicted with a cold. November 26, 1835.
Joseph Smith, in his diary of July 1835, talked specifically about translating characters or hieroglyphics and finding that it was about, one was about Abraham and one was about Joseph. So there was a book of Abraham and there's a book of Joseph.
He, with a couple of his scribes, began working on an alphabet and grammar of the Egyptian language. And we have documents, some of which, or one of which, was written by Joseph Smith himself, with some additions by Oliver Cowdery, and another one in the handwriting of William W. Phelps. And then we have, in addition, some remarks made, or small additions made, in the handwriting of Warren Parrish.
Through the autumn and early winter of 1835, Joseph continued to work on the project. And eventually, the mummies and the scrolls were moved to an upper floor room here at the Kirtland Temple, where Joseph continued to work on the translation. But the translation project soon tapered off, and Joseph moved on to other matters related to leading his community. He established his own bank in Kirtland and issued his own currency. But in 1838, when the venture went bankrupt, Joseph fled Kirtland on horseback in the middle of the night and never returned. In 1839, the Mormon community relocated to a small town on the banks of the Mississippi River known as Commerce, Illinois. Joseph renamed the town Nauvoo, a Hebrew word meaning beautiful.
I mean, it was a place with a few houses and 2 stores, I think. It was just a little tiny wide spot in the road, but it was located on a really pretty bluff. There were, maybe 20 people there, 25, 30, and it became the largest town in Illinois within 5 years.
In Nauvoo, Joseph would achieve his greatest fame. He was the mayor of the town and had his own militia of nearly 3,000 men. At the time, the U.S. military totaled less than 9,000. And there was even a movement underway to nominate Joseph for the presidency of the United States. It was in Nauvoo that Joseph finally published his translation of the Abraham Scroll. It first appeared in 1842 in 3 installments of a Mormon newspaper called The Times and Seasons. It was called the Book of Abraham, and a note at the beginning introduced it as a translation of some ancient records that have fallen into our hands from the catacombs of Egypt, purporting to be the writings of Abraham while he was in Egypt, called the Book of Abraham, written by his own hand upon papyrus.